President Joe Biden dropped some big news yesterday. He's ending his campaign for re-election. He's the first sitting president to do so in more than 50 years. Biden endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to replace him. Some voters here in the North Country welcome the prospect of Harris as the new Democratic nominee, but others don't like how things are going down. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street, Glens Falls.
Hi, I'm Kara Chapman, filling in for David Summerstein. It's Monday, July 22nd. Up first, state and federal officials are reacting to the news that Biden has ended his re-election campaign. The North Country's Republican Congresswomen, Elise Stefanik and Claudia Tenney, say that if he's not fit to run, he's also not fit to govern. Stefanik is calling on the president to resign. She says his departure from the race disenfranchises the votes of the 14 million people who supported him in the primary. In the Senate, Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Biden put his country first by deciding to end his campaign. Fellow Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand said she was honored to serve during Biden's administration and endorsed Vice President Harris. At an event in New York City today, Governor Kathy Hochul also expressed her support for Harris. She drew a contrast between the vice president and the Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump.
A prosecutor against a convicted felon, a woman who has stood up for women's rights, who stands up for women, an individual who abuses women, a person who stands up and supports democracy, and a person who attacks it. So this is going to be a campaign for the ages.
Meanwhile, both New York's Republican and Democratic Party state chairs say they're confident about their party's chances in November. Ian Pickus reports for the New York Public News Network.
Biden's announcement came after weeks of pressure from fellow Democrats who were alarmed by his first debate performance and subsequent polling and fundraising troubles. Biden endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to succeed him, but it's not immediately clear what the nomination process will look like ahead of next month's convention in Chicago. Jay Jacobs, chair of the New York State Democratic Party, says Biden put the nation and the party ahead of his own interests.
I think he once again demonstrates, just the type of character that he has. And, I wish him well, and I know that he'll be a big help for us in the upcoming election. And he'll, continue to do a good job governing through his term.
Jacobs, who endorsed Harris, says Democrats will be united in their efforts to defeat former President Donald Trump. But State Republican Party Chair Ed Cox says Trump remains on track to win back the White House.
She is as responsible for the position of her party at this point, and changing horses, whether to Vice President Harris or to anyone else, is not going to change the fact that former President Donald Trump is on his way to a landslide victory.
The election is just over 100 days away. In Albany, this is Ian Pickus for the New York Public News Network.
Voters around the country have been processing the news that President Joe Biden won't be running for re-election. Here in the North Country, some are celebrating the potential that Vice President Kamala Harris will be the Democratic nominee, while others are critical of how the process is unfolding. Our assistant news director, Emily Russell, reports.
President Joe Biden announced on Sunday afternoon that he's not running for re-election. On Monday morning, as she was dropping off packages at the Plattsburgh post office, Ann Rooney said the news was bittersweet.
I am relieved that he stepped down, and I admire him very much for all that he's done for our country.
Rooney was tearing up as she talked about Biden's legacy. The president, who is 81 years old, has been in politics for nearly all his adult life.
He has been a wonderful person. He's a person with a heart. He's smart, and he is for our country.
Biden had been under a lot of pressure to drop out of the race since his shaky debate performance in late June. While some in the North Country were relieved by Sunday's announcement, others were more critical of the move.
So just tell me
I guess what your reaction was when you heard about the news that Biden wasn't running for re-election.
What took you so long?
That's Jill Tazinski. She's from the southwestern Adirondacks near Forestport. She was in Lake Placid volunteering for the Ironman. Tazinski describes herself as a Republican libertarian. She thinks Biden should never have run for re-election. She says she's long questioned his mental fitness. So I asked Tazinski about Trump, who is 78 years old, and like Biden, has also misspoken a number of times in recent months.
You know, I've listened to a couple clips where he misspoke, and actually most politicians do when they're constantly, up in front of people. But I think Trump handles himself really well, and I think he's extremely healthy.
Trump has remained popular among Republicans in the North Country and around the U.S. Before Sunday's announcement, Trump was polling ahead of Biden, particularly in some key battleground states. Christopher Kirky, a political science professor at SUNY Plattsburgh, says that was putting Democrats on edge.
I think there was a very genuine concern and a real concern based on polling numbers and potential electoral college votes that Donald Trump was going to win, but not only going to win, but win big. And that would be a bit lopsided. Now it changes that dynamic.
Kirky says he thinks there's a clearer path to victory for Democrats this November, especially if they rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris.
She's going to effectively attract suburban women, youth, black vote, and I think it's going to be much more competitive.
Harris has been endorsed by many top Democrats, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but it's still unclear if Harris will be the one and only candidate. The Democratic National Committee plans to meet on Wednesday to talk about next month's convention. Steve Graff from Plattsburgh thinks Harris has a shot of winning against Trump, but he says he wants to see a more transparent nominating process.
Personally, I think there needs to be an open Democratic convention, and I think that the delegates need to decide, because if they don't, and the DNC decides, then the public may feel that somebody was shoved down their throat they don't want.
That's kind of how Andy Foster from Plattsburgh feels. He's a Democrat, says he'll cast his ballot for anyone who challenges Trump. But Foster wishes Biden had stepped down before the primaries.
I don't necessarily like the fact that they're force-feeding us Kamala when she wasn't somebody that I voted for. But again, like I said, I would vote for anybody over Donald Trump, so I'll be voting for her, but I would have liked the opportunity to vote for somebody else in a primary.
Harris hasn't secured the Democratic nomination. That would happen at the convention in August. If she does, she'd be the first woman of color to run for president on a major party ticket. Emily Nevinger, who's from Rochester but spends summers in Lake Placid, thinks the country is ready for Harris to lead.
We've had white men, serve as presidents forever, and it's time, other than Obama, but it's time to have a woman take the role. I think that the country could benefit from her perspective, certainly.
Nevinger says regardless of who wins in November, she's worried about the future of the country, worried about how divided Americans are. She says that's why this election matters so much.
I think what's best for the U.S. is to have a leader who is going to unite us and to get over, the divide and the differences and really try to bridge and find those even small things that unite us.
Nevinger thinks Kamala Harris is the person to do that, but it's unclear if enough Democrats will feel the same way. With reporting help from Kara Chapman, I'm Emily Russell for North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Lost in Beijing of Keene and Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario. I'm Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio.